When I needed a ride to my doctor's appointment, my daughter-in-law said, "You've had your years, let someone else live now." My son texted, "We're busy, maybe next week." As I sat at the clinic alone, I saw her post online, "Finally a day without grandpa drama." But she didn't expect who was sitting in that waiting room watching every move and preparing to. I remember gripping the edge of the vinyl chair in the clinic waiting room, my knuckles white, my chest tight like I'd swallowed a fist. I'd called my son, my only child, the night before, asking for a ride to my doctor's appointment. Just a simple favor, a few miles, nothing monumental. And instead of a "sure, Mom," I got silence. Then a text, "We're busy, maybe next week." I stared at my phone so long I could have etched the words into the screen. Maybe I should have been shocked. Maybe I should have cried, but the truth was I was not really. Not anymore. I'd learned the patterns over the years. The way my daughter-in-law smiled at me with those perfect, polite teeth while rolling her eyes when I wasn't looking. The way she controlled my son with subtle digs, with quiet little victories. The way they both, together, had decided I was optional. So there I sat in the stark white fluorescent hum of the waiting room, the scent of antiseptic clinging to my hair, my coat folded neatly on my lap. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that this was just a doctor's appointment, that it didn't matter, that I was exaggerating. And then I saw it. Her post. Finally a day without grandpa drama, smiling face with sunglasses. The words burned on my phone screen, and suddenly all the heat I'd been holding in my chest boiled over. I read it again, and again. My daughter-in-law with her perfect life, her perfect house, her perfect husband, the one I raised, was flaunting my exclusion. Publicly, online. And here I was, forced to sit alone, dragging myself into the clinic like some inconvenient afterthought, while she crowed about her freedom like it was a trophy. I felt something stir inside me, a cold, precise sort of clarity that left the hurt behind and replaced it with something sharper. I was watching every detail, every subtle behavior she had in her post, how she had staged the photo, the angle, the lighting, that smug little smirk she always wore, and suddenly I didn't feel helpless. I felt observant. I felt a plan forming, small and deliberate, like a shadow creeping over a wall. I caught her out of the corner of my eye in the waiting room. I don't know how, maybe a cruel twist of fate or maybe sheer luck, but there she was in the same clinic, not realizing I'd arrived before her. My pulse jumped. My mind snapped into that dangerous, laser-focused mode I hadn't felt in years. I could see the way she adjusted her hair, the way she tucked her phone under her arm. She had no idea that I knew, no idea that I was paying attention to every movement, every tick, every micro-expression that betrayed the arrogance she tried so hard to hide. I leaned back in my chair, masking my fury with a deep, calm breath. I thought about my son, my supposed only family, the one who had sent that casual, dismissive text while I sat worrying about whether I'd even get to see a doctor. And then I thought about her, the architect of my humiliation, her smugness wrapped around her like armor. And I knew that this was just the beginning. Because while she thought she had the day, she didn't know who was sitting in the waiting room. She didn't know who was watching her, cataloging every detail, memorizing her patterns, measuring the distance from her smug little smile to the world she thought she controlled. She had no idea that someone who had been dismissed, ignored, and disrespected for years was now sitting in silence, waiting, planning. And when I finally moved, it wouldn't just be a ride she'd need me. It wouldn't just be another day. It would be something she never saw coming. Something precise, something irreversible. And as I watched her laugh softly at a text she received, I whispered to myself, almost inaudibly, the thought that fueled every heartbeat in that room. She's about to regret underestimating me. I wasn't always this quiet, this careful, this calculated. I used to be the kind of mother who called 3 times a day, who baked cookies for school events, who rearranged her entire schedule just to make it to my son's baseball games. I did all of it willingly, never thinking twice, because I believed family meant presence, support, love, and for a long time it was enough. My son adored me in that simple, stubborn way only a child can, and I was proud. But then she came along. My daughter-in-law, God, I should have seen it from the beginning. The first time I met her, she smiled in a way that seemed sweet, polite, and harmless, but there was an edge there, something in her eyes that didn't match her words. She complimented my cooking, my home, my son, but her compliments felt like statements in disguise, like she was marking territory. I remember the little things at first, the way she jokingly corrected my parenting advice, how she subtly questioned my decisions, how she would always insert herself between my son and me at gatherings, family dinners, holidays. It was small at first, but I noticed. I just didn't know how far it would go. Over the years, the subtle digs became sharp knives. Birthdays passed without calls, holidays without invitations, favors ignored. And the son I raised, the boy who used to sit on my lap and tell me about his dreams, stopped calling, stopped visiting. He was polite in his texts, but his loyalty had shifted, and she had made sure of it. I watched from the sidelines as my presence was minimized, my voice dismissed. The breaking point came last year. My knees had started to ache, my hearing wasn't what it used to be, and I needed more help than I had ever asked for before. A simple request, one ride to a doctor's appointment, turned into a revelation of just how expendable I had become. That text from my son, "We're busy, maybe next week." I had spent the night rereading it, trying to convince myself it was accidental, that he had a legitimate excuse. But the moment I saw her post online the next morning, gloating about her day, without grandpa drama, I knew the truth. They didn't just ignore me, they celebrated it. I spent weeks replaying their words, their actions, the micro moments that I had ignored or excused. Every family gathering where I'd been passed over for attention, every holiday where my presence was tolerated but not appreciated, every birthday where my role was reduced to a polite nod. She had systematically removed me from the life I had built around them. And I realized in that bitter, cold clarity that this wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate. It was cruelty dressed up as civility. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt that old, dormant pulse, the part of me that used to protect, fight, and demand respect, stirring. For years, I had swallowed my pride, brushed aside my hurt, and told myself, this is just how life is. But now I understood. I had allowed them to believe I was weak, harmless, and compliant. I wasn't weak, not anymore. That morning in the clinic, sitting alone, I traced every interaction, every post, every laugh that I'd been excluded from. I catalogued her arrogance, her overconfidence, the way she thought she had won, and I knew what I needed to do. I wasn't going to plead, beg, or reason with them. I wasn't going to cry about it, call them out publicly, or let the humiliation linger unaddressed. This was bigger than an argument, bigger than a text, bigger than a day ruined. This was about restoring a balance they didn't even know existed. I had been patient, I had been ignored, I had been humiliated, and now, finally, the tables were about to turn. Because they didn't realize, yet, that the quiet, overlooked, politely sidelined mother they had dismissed was about to become the one they would never forget. Sitting there in that clinic, I realized that I couldn't rely on chance anymore. I had spent years letting them decide how much of me mattered. No more. If I was going to reclaim even a fragment of dignity, it had to come from me. I started small, just observing. Every gesture, every habit she had, I catalogued it in my head. The way she checked her phone obsessively when she thought no one was watching. The way her laugh faltered when she told lies about me to mutual acquaintances. The way she had planted herself at the center of every social gathering, making herself indispensable while pushing me to the edges. It became an obsession, not the kind that consumes in desperation, but a precise, calculating focus. I started tracking her routines. Social media gave me everything I needed: pictures, posts, locations, even patterns in her online activity. Every morning, she would scroll through her feed for 30 minutes before leaving for work. Every Saturday, she volunteered at that charity she flaunted endlessly, pretending to be saintly. Every Thursday, she stopped at that small cafe near my old neighborhood. I memorized it all, the way a hunter memorizes the wind before a strike. Meanwhile, I trained myself to be invisible in plain sight. At the clinic, I stayed calm, quiet, blending in while my mind worked 10 steps ahead. No sudden movements, no signals, nothing. Every time she looked up, I was polite, almost ghost-like, letting her arrogance blind her. And it did. She had no idea I was already 3 steps into my plan. I began preparing what I would need. My own finances had become independent over the years. I had savings, access, and a mind sharpened by years of being overlooked. I started making calls, researching, digging into the little habits that she had used to assert control over my son and everyone else. I found small inconsistencies, memberships she hadn't renewed, subscriptions she thought were secret, even a car service she relied on that had lax privacy. These were the threads I could pull to unravel her world, one knot at a time. I practiced patience like a second skin. I watched her posts online, noting the subtle arrogance, the way she assumed her day-to-day superiority went unnoticed. I catalogued her friends and confidants, the people who helped prop up her sense of control. And with every observation, I built scenarios, rehearsing outcomes in my head with the precision of a chess master. Then came the internal battle, my own son. He had been the hardest part to watch. Not malicious, not cruel, just passive. He followed her lead, letting her dictate how he treated me. He sent that text like a handshake of dismissal, leaving me alone in the waiting room, leaving her gloating online. Part of me wanted to confront him, scream, beg, something to awaken the loyalty I thought he still had buried inside, but I knew that path would only alert her. The path of direct confrontation would fail. I needed patience, and I needed invisibility. I needed her to underestimate me completely. And in that waiting room, as she scrolled through her phone, laughing softly at some meme or comment I couldn't see, I felt it. The first surge of empowerment I had felt in years. I was no longer just the sideline mother. I was the observer, the planner, the one holding the invisible strings. Every laugh, every smug post, every dismissive glance she had sent my way, it was fuel. I smiled quietly, almost imperceptibly, and whispered under my breath, "Enjoy your day. I've got yours coming." Because I wasn't just preparing a reaction, I was preparing a reckoning, and it was going to be methodical, meticulous, and unforgettable. And she had no idea that the first domino had already fallen. It happened faster than I could have imagined. I was sitting in the corner of the clinic's waiting room, pretending to scroll through old messages when a familiar voice carried across the hall. My daughter-in-law, laughing that same high-pitched, calculated laugh I knew so well, was talking to someone on the phone. But then I heard a name, one I never expected, my son. I froze. She was talking about him, yes, but the way she said it, the words were like ice in my veins. "He doesn't care about your mother," she was saying. "He's completely mine, don't worry about her. Let her stew, she's harmless now." Harmless, that word hit harder than any slap. I realized something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She hadn't just dismissed me, she had actively manipulated my son into believing I was irrelevant. Every slight, every excuse, every dismissal over the years hadn't been passive, it had been orchestrated. She had worked to create the perfect scenario where I would be ignored, invisible, powerless. My own child had been complicit, not because he wanted to, but because he had been conditioned. And then the audacity. She laughed like it was all a game, like she'd won something monumental, and my pulse went cold. She wasn't just cruel, she was cunning. She had turned our family into her chessboard. I realized in that instant that my revenge couldn't just be about making her pay. It had to be about exposing her control, dismantling the illusion she'd built around my son, and showing him exactly who she really was. If I attacked her directly, she would manipulate him again and nothing would change. But if I struck with precision, quietly, indirectly, I could destabilize everything she relied on without her realizing it until it was too late. I started moving almost subconsciously, letting my hands rest casually in my lap, letting my eyes drift toward the small details around the room. I noticed a familiar logo on the receptionist's badge. It was her volunteer group, the one she bragged about endlessly online, and that's when the idea hit me. I could use her own arrogance against her. She wanted visibility, recognition, adoration. She craved attention and control, and I could weaponize that. But then, just as I started forming the first thread of my plan, the son I had raised, my son, walked through the door. He didn't see me at first, which was fine. He hadn't expected me here. He hadn't planned for me to be watching. And in that moment, the first twist crystallized. He wasn't completely blind to her behavior, not entirely. He froze when he saw me, the casual composure he usually wore faltering. There was guilt, surprise, something raw in his eyes. She didn't notice. She laughed, gesturing toward him with a wave that was meant to pull him fully under her spell, and he hesitated. He didn't step forward, he didn't join her, he just stood there awkward, caught between two worlds. And in that heartbeat, I realized something shocking. He could be my unwitting ally. He could be a tool or a pawn, but only if I played it right. The power wasn't just in her arrogance, it was in the cracks she didn't see, in the blind spots she created by relying on everyone to do exactly what she expected, and that included my son. I smiled quietly to myself. The first twist was clear. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. I wasn't just striking out at her. I was about to pull the rug out from under both of them, using their arrogance, their assumptions, and the one person they thought was fully under her control, my son. And as she laughed again, completely oblivious to my presence, I whispered under my breath, a quiet promise that no one could hear. "You think you've won, but you have no idea who's really watching and waiting." That night after leaving the clinic, I went straight home, every nerve buzzing. I didn't speak to anyone, I didn't call my son, I didn't even turn on the news. I sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of me, and I started writing everything down. Every slight, every insult, every humiliating moment I could remember over the years. I catalogued them not with anger, but with precision, like a scientist charting data points. Each entry became a stepping stone for what I knew I had to do next. I had to be strategic. The kind of revenge that burns slowly but leaves permanent marks isn't impulsive, it's meticulous. I divided my plan into layers. First, the public exposure. She loved her curated image online, her perfect life, her self-created pedestal. That would be the first target. Second, the emotional impact. My son had to see exactly who she was, exactly how far she had manipulated him, and feel the betrayal firsthand. Finally, the personal strike. She had underestimated me for decades, and I wanted her to realize she had empowered someone she thought was harmless. I spent hours online, digging into her social media, learning her patterns, tracking the people who reinforced her sense of superiority. I found posts that contradicted each other, little slip-ups she thought no one noticed, tiny truths hidden in the curated lie of her perfect life. I saved screenshots, copied links, everything. These would be my weapons. Next, I needed to test her confidence, the arrogance that had blinded her. I called the volunteer group she relied on, posing as someone who wanted to join, praising her leadership. I learned about her schedule, the times she was most visible, the events she bragged about publicly. Every interaction I had was a calculated probe, and every time she smiled at me, assuming I was harmless, I felt the first real surge of control I'd experienced in years. Then there was my son. I knew involving him would be tricky. He was loyal but confused, caught between the two of us. I didn't confront him directly. I started leaving subtle breadcrumbs, small truths that contradicted the narrative she had built around him. A text here, a question there, references to things he had forgotten, incidents she had lied about. I wanted him to start seeing the cracks for himself. I wanted him to hesitate, to doubt, to wonder. By the end of the night, I had drafted a schedule, a timeline of subtle strikes, digital nudges, and orchestrated coincidences. The plan wasn't about chaos, it was about inevitability. She would see it all unravel, piece by piece, and there would be no one to blame but herself. Her smug little empire would crumble from the inside, and there would be no warning until the collapse was total. As I closed the notebook, my hands were steady, my heart no longer racing in panic but in anticipation. I finally understood that revenge wasn't just about anger, it was about control. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was holding the reins. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The woman staring back wasn't the sideline mother who begged for a ride or waited alone in a clinic. She was something else, patient, observant, precise, dangerous if necessary. And when I thought about my daughter-in-law, about her smug online posts, about the casual cruelty she'd leveled against me, a single thought crystallized. She had underestimated me for the last time. The first moves were already in motion, invisible, untraceable, undeniable. And when the dominoes started falling, she wouldn't just regret what she did to me. She would realize, far too late, that she had created a storm she couldn't survive. I went to bed that night with a calm I hadn't felt in decades, and as I drifted off, I whispered to the darkness, "Tomorrow, you start paying for every year you thought you could erase me." I thought I had everything under control, every post tracked, every lie documented, every interaction with my son carefully calibrated. I was ready to execute the first phase of my plan, but life, as it tends to do, had its own way of throwing me off balance. It started with a message from a stranger on one of her posts. It was brief, almost cryptic. "You need to know the truth about her. She isn't who you think." At first I laughed it off. Another troll, probably jealous or bitter, but the seed of curiosity took root. I clicked through and then the panic hit. The messages revealed a hidden layer of her life I hadn't expected. Financial manipulations, deceit, and betrayals that extended far beyond our family. She had been siphoning money from people who trusted her, using fake charities and volunteer work as cover. She had friends and colleagues completely in the dark. And most horrifying, she had set up a network of influence that could easily ruin me if she ever found out I was digging. I realized then that she wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. My meticulous plan, which had relied on her arrogance and predictability, now had to adapt. Every move I had plotted could backfire catastrophically if she discovered I was aware of her secret network. This wasn't just personal revenge anymore, it was survival. And then came the bigger shock. My son, my own child, had been secretly observing her too. He had noticed inconsistencies, hints of deceit, and he had been quietly investigating on his own, trying not to confront either of us until he understood the full picture. The realization hit me like a blow. I wasn't alone. But worse, he was torn, caught between the mother he had ignored for so long and the woman he loved, whose lies had shaped his reality. I had underestimated him. I had assumed his loyalty was absolute to her. It was, and that changed everything. Now I had two allies in the making. My own son, quietly gathering evidence of her manipulation, and me, with years of emotional data and strategic patience. But this also meant the stakes were higher. One wrong move, one misstep, and everything I had planned could collapse, exposing me to the very same humiliation I had spent years enduring. I spent the next few days recalibrating. I mapped out her schedule in greater detail, identifying vulnerabilities she thought were hidden. I coordinated subtle cues with my son, leading her to believe we were still divided and unaware. Every post she made online, every volunteer activity, every casual boast became a tool. And then I began planting minor, seemingly accidental disruptions. Misplaced messages, delayed emails, small hints that her carefully crafted persona was fraying. By the end of the week, I had created a system where her confidence was a liability, her arrogance a weapon turned against her. And the second twist hit me fully. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was exposure, a complete dismantling of the illusion she had built around herself, and the knowledge that my son would finally see her for what she truly was. I smiled quietly, my pulse steady but my mind alight. The storm wasn't just coming, it was imminent. And the person who had underestimated me for decades, the one who had thought she could erase me from her world, had no idea that every move she made had already been anticipated. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge doesn't arrive as a shout or a confrontation. It arrives as inevitability, with every carefully placed piece falling perfectly into place. And in that moment, I knew she was about to learn exactly what it meant to be unprepared. The next week I watched her carefully, my pulse calm but my mind racing. Every smile she offered to strangers, every casual boast she posted online, every nod she gave my son, all of it became fuel. And I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about a missed ride or a humiliating post. It was never about that. It was about control, about dominance, about the audacity of someone who thought they could erase a person entirely, who believed that love and family could be so easily manipulated. She had built her life on erasing me. Little by little, subtle humiliation after subtle humiliation, she had taken my son, my family, my presence, and stripped them of the loyalty and respect I had earned over decades. And yet there was a deeper betrayal than I had initially understood. My son had been complicit, yes, but only because she had been so cunning, so manipulative, that he didn't recognize what was real until too late. The true villain was her, the architect of this cruel world where I was made invisible. I spent hours replaying her smug laugh in my head, the way she thought she could mock me online with impunity. I thought about all the holidays I had spent pretending everything was fine, all the moments I had swallowed my pride to keep peace, and all the little ways she had taught my son to doubt me instead of questioning her own cruelty. That day in the clinic had been a revelation, but now I understood the full, brutal truth. The depth of her arrogance was matched only by the meticulous care she took to shield herself from consequences. And that's when I realized why I had to go beyond simple revenge. This wasn't just about teaching her a lesson. It was about reclaiming myself. Every strike I made, every truth I revealed had to be layered with precision, exposing not just her lies but the way she had systematically tried to erase me from existence. The reason for everything, the driving force behind my plan, was clear: survival, dignity, and the knowledge that someone who treated me as disposable would never have the satisfaction of knowing she had won. I coordinated the pieces carefully with my son, using subtle hints to encourage him to question everything she had told him. He began noticing discrepancies on his own, small lies and manipulations he had trusted without thinking. Slowly, the cracks formed. Every post, every interaction, every smirk she had relied on to convince herself of her superiority now became evidence against her, and she didn't notice a thing. She believed she was untouchable, above the consequences of her actions. And then came the final piece of the puzzle, the dramatic reason that tied everything together. I remembered my own words in the clinic. She's about to regret underestimating me, but it wasn't just about her regret, it was about her understanding. About making her confront the full scope of her manipulations, her arrogance, and the years she had stolen from me, not just to see her crumble, but to reclaim what was rightfully mine. My son's recognition of the truth, my dignity, and the knowledge that she could never erase me again. When she finally realized it, she wouldn't just feel embarrassed or humiliated. She would feel the full weight of every act of cruelty she had inflicted, every manipulation she had perfected. And my son, watching her unravel, would understand exactly who she was, and exactly who had been there for him all along. And that's when I smiled, quietly, almost imperceptibly. The reckoning was close. The inevitability was set in motion. And the woman who had treated me as disposable, who had assumed she could erase me from her world, was about to understand that the person she underestimated for decades had not only survived, but had prepared the most unforgettable lesson of her life. Because this wasn't just revenge, this was justice, and she would see it in full before the day was done. It happened on a Saturday. Of course it did. Her favorite day, the one she always used to showcase her perfect life. The volunteer event she had been promoting for weeks was in full swing, packed with people who admired her, trusted her, believed in the version of herself she had carefully constructed. I arrived early, quietly, dressed simply, blending in just as I had practiced. No one paid attention to me. Why would they? To them, I was just another older woman attending a community event, invisible, harmless, exactly what she had trained everyone to believe. My son arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't stand beside her this time. That was the first crack everyone could see, though they didn't understand it yet. He stayed back, watching, his face tight, his posture rigid. He had seen enough over the past week, enough inconsistencies, enough evidence that doubt had taken root, but he didn't know everything, not yet. She, on the other hand, was radiant, smiling, laughing, moving from person to person like she owned the room. She greeted donors, posed for photos, accepted praise like it was her right. Every gesture was calculated, every word rehearsed. And as I stood there watching her, I felt nothing like anger anymore, just clarity. When the event coordinator stepped up to the microphone to thank everyone, I knew it was time. I walked forward before I could second-guess myself. Calm, measured, controlled. I asked for the microphone, my voice steady enough that no one questioned it. She noticed me then, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something flicker across her face. Not annoyance, not superiority. Fear. I didn't rush, I didn't raise my voice, I simply began. I spoke about the organization, about trust, about the importance of transparency. I spoke like someone who belonged there. Then slowly I started introducing the evidence. Screenshots, financial inconsistencies, messages, patterns, not accusations, facts, carefully laid out one after another, impossible to dismiss. At first people looked confused, then uneasy, then silent. She tried to interrupt me, but my son stepped forward, not to defend her but to stop her. That was the moment everything shifted. The room saw it, the hesitation, the fracture. And then I said the one thing I had been holding onto since that day in the clinic. I asked for a ride to a doctor's appointment, I said, my voice still steady, and I was told there was no time for me, but there was time for this, for lies, for appearances, for pretending to be something you're not. I didn't look at her when I said it, I looked at my son. His face broke in a way I will never forget, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, devastating realization. Everything he had ignored, everything he had excused, collapsing all at once under the weight of truth. The room turned on her quickly after that. Questions, doubts, people stepping back, distancing themselves. Her carefully built image began to crumble in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. No charm, no deflection, no manipulation could fix what had been exposed so publicly, so completely. She tried to speak, to explain, to regain control, but her voice didn't carry the same authority anymore. It sounded small, desperate. And I realized something in that moment. I didn't need to destroy her completely. Watching her lose control, watching her face the consequences of her own actions, was enough. I handed the microphone back without another word. I didn't stay to argue. I didn't stay to watch her fall apart completely. I had already seen enough. As I walked out, my son followed me. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did I. Then quietly he said, "Mom, I didn't know." I stopped, but I didn't turn around right away. When I did, I looked at him, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something he hadn't seen from me in years. Distance. "I know," I said. And then I left him there. Because the truth was, my revenge wasn't just exposing her. It was reclaiming myself. It was showing them both that I was never as small, as harmless, or as forgettable as they believed. And as I walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sadness. Peace.